April 8, 1934, Baltimore, Maryland, 12:45 p.m. Within the walls of Johns Hopkins Clinic, the heart of Franklin Clarence Mars stops. He is 50 years old. At that very moment, 700 miles from the hospital room in Giles County, Tennessee, an unnatural silence hangs over the hills of the Milky Way farm. There is no grief here. There is fear. 935 workers, hired to build the most ambitious private estate in the South, freeze. The man who paid them wages in the midst of the Great Depression is dead. The man whom locals called Count Mars has become a body that needs to be transported across half the country. This is not just the death of a businessman. This is the fall of a monarch. Franklin Mars did not simply die. His body was eaten away by Bright's disease. The kidneys failed. The heart, unable to withstand the strain from the weight of his own body and endless stress, gave out. But the preparation for this moment had begun long before April 8th. On the estate grounds, amid the green hills of Tennessee, a stone mausoleum already awaits. A small structure with thick walls designed specifically for him. He built it himself. He knew this day would come. He personally approved the spot where his body would lie forever, or so he thought. The scene looks surreal. Imagine the picture. America, 1934. The country lies in economic ruins. Lines for free soup in New York stretch for blocks. People lose homes, farms, and hope. And here, in the wilds of Tennessee, the casket with the body of the Chocolate King is carried through the gates of an estate that cost millions of dollars. The cortege passes by stone walls laid by hand, past 30 giant barns, past a private hippodrome. It looks like the funeral of a pharaoh who decided to take his gold with him to the afterlife. The widow, Ethel Mars, walks behind the casket. She does not cry. She gazes at the empire they built in 3 years. 25,000 square feet of living space, 21 bedrooms, 14 bathrooms finished in Art Deco style. A house that devoured the revenues from millions of sold Milky Way and Snickers bars. But behind the facade of this mournful grandeur hides a cruel truth. This estate was not just a home. It was a fortress. It was exile. And most importantly, it was a battlefield. While Frank's body is being lowered into the crypt, another figure stands in the shadow of this story. He is not here physically, but his presence is felt in every brick, in every dollar spent on this palace. Forrest Mars, the son. The man who was not expected here. The man who hated this house. The conflict that led to the creation of this estate was invisible to society column reporters. Newspapers wrote about the rural paradise and return to the land. They lied. Or at least, they did not see the full picture. The truth was that Milky Way was a monument not only to success, but also to a colossal family rift. The father built the palace to prove his greatness. The son saw in this palace only a grave for the company's capital. On the day of the funeral, the workers whispered not about Frank's legacy. They whispered about the future. What will happen to the estate? What will happen to the money? And most importantly, who is in charge now? They did not know that this house, this grand Tudor-style castle, was already doomed. The story that led to this moment did not begin with death. It began with the birth of an idea that was too big for one man and too dangerous for another. To understand why this house stands here among the fields of Tennessee like an alien spaceship, we need to rewind time. We need to go back to the point where poverty, polio, and ambitions created an explosive mixture. We must see not the end, but the beginning. We must understand where this man came from and why he fled here. This investigation is not a tour of beautiful rooms. It is the anatomy of obsession. We enter the estate that was supposed to become paradise, but became a golden cage. Welcome to the Milky Way farm, the place where chocolate turned into concrete and family ties into a Cold War. To understand why a man builds a castle in the middle of Tennessee cornfields, we need to go back 50 years, not to the sunny southern state, but to the icy hell of late 19th century Minnesota. Franklin Clarence Mars's story does not begin with $1 million check. It begins with a diagnosis that sounded like a death sentence. 1883, Hancock, Minnesota. Frank is born into a world where physical strength is the only currency of survival. But fate decrees otherwise. In early childhood, he is struck by polio. This event is the foundation of his entire psychology. While other boys run, fight, and learn to handle the plow, Frank is confined to a chair. His legs are weak. He depends on a crutch that he will grip in his hand until the end of his days. It is here, in this immobility, that the observer is born. Deprived of the ability to participate in the physical world on equal terms, he begins to analyze this world. His universe shrinks to the size of his mother Elva's kitchen, and it becomes his laboratory. Elva teaches the boy the only craft that requires no running, the art of dipping filling into hot chocolate. Hand dipping. Remember this image: a lame boy sitting by the stove, inhaling the smell of sugar and cocoa, while outside the window whistles the wind he cannot outrun. Chocolate for him is not a treat. It is a tool of control. It is chemistry. It is the only way to be useful. But the path from the kitchen to the empire was not a straight line. It was a catastrophe stretched over 2 decades. Modern business coaches love to tell success stories, but Frank Mars's story is the story of a serial failure. On August 19, 1902, he marries Ethel Kissick. They have a son, Forrest. It seems like the beginning of a dynasty. But the business collapses. The marriage collapses. In 1910, Ethel files for divorce, takes the son, and leaves for Canada. Frank is left alone. Bankrupt. Disabled. Failure. In 1911, he marries for the second time to Ethel Healy. They start over in Tacoma, Washington. Mars Candy Factory Company. It sounds grand, but in reality it is artisanal production. And again, collapse. Creditors take everything. There is a documented fact. When the business in Tacoma closed, creditors removed the furniture from the house and even personal belongings. Frank and Ethel are left in empty walls. $400. That is all he had in his pocket in 1920 when he returned to Minneapolis. He is 37 years old. Most people have a career by this age. Frank has only debts and a crutch. But it is at this moment, at the bottom of despair, that his unique philosophy forms. The philosophy of affordable luxury. He understands the market in a way his competitors do not. America is changing. People are moving to cities. The pace of life is accelerating. A factory worker does not need a kilogram of candy in a pretty box to eat at home with tea. He needs fuel. He needs energy here and now. Quick, cheap, on the go. Frank sees what others do not. Chocolate must become democratic. 1923. the moment of truth. According to corporate legend, the idea came during a conversation with the returning son, Forrest, but the implementation is pure Frank's genius. The idea is simple and revolutionary. Take the taste of the chocolate malted milkshake, malted milk, which was insanely popular at the time, and package it in solid form. Thus, the Milky Way bar is born. It was an engineering triumph, not a culinary one. The secret was not in expensive chocolate, but in volume. The base of the bar was nougat, a whipped mixture of egg whites and syrup, essentially air and sugar. This allowed the bar to be visually enormous, much larger than competitors, while remaining cheap to produce. The buyer saw a giant piece of chocolate on the shelf for 5 cents. Competitors, such as Hershey's, sold flat bars of pure chocolate. Mars sold air covered with a thin layer of coating. But for the hungry consumer, it looked like the deal of the century. The slogan, "Food, not just candy," hit the mark precisely. In an era when people began counting every cent, Frank Mars offered them the illusion of abundance. Success was instant and brutal for competitors. In the first year alone, sales soared to $800,000, an enormous sum for those times. 3 years later, it was already millions. And here we come to the main psychological turning point. Frank Mars, the boy with the crutch, whom neighbors pitied, suddenly becomes king. Money flows like a river. But money does not heal childhood traumas. It scales them. Frank does not want to be just a rich factory owner. He wants to be an aristocrat. He wants to erase from memory the years of humiliation, the furniture carried out by creditors, and the pitying looks. He needs status. In Chicago, where the company headquarters moves, he encounters closed doors. Old money, families that have held capital for generations, look at him as an upstart. To the elite, he is the candy king, a nouveau riche, a man without pedigree. His millions smell of nougat and sweat. He is not accepted into exclusive clubs. His manners are too loud, his cars too flashy. This social conflict becomes fuel for his next step. If society does not give him a castle, he will build it himself. If the elite does not accept him on their terms, he will create his own kingdom, where he will be absolute monarch. His worldview transforms. He begins to believe that success in business gives him the right to create a utopia. He dreams of a place that will become the physical embodiment of his victory over circumstances. A place where his limp does not matter, because he will move around on the finest steeds that money can buy. Horses. This is the second part of his philosophy. Why horses specifically? For a man who walks with difficulty, a horse is borrowed legs. It is strength, grace, and speed that nature deprived him of. Sitting in the saddle, Frank Mars was taller than everyone. He was faster than everyone. He was powerful. By the end of the 1920s, he has everything. A thriving corporation, the new hit Snickers, named after one of his horses, a wife who shares his passion for luxury. But he feels cramped in the city. He feels cramped within the framework of a mere businessman. A plan ripens in his head. He wants not just a dacha. He wants a feudal estate. He searches for land. And he finds it not in fashionable New York or California, but in the South, in Tennessee. Why there? Because the land is cheap there. People need work, and the laws are flexible. There he can be not just a rich neighbor. There he can be God. He buys 2,800 acres of land. This is the territory of a small town. He calls it Milky Way Farm. The name sounds like a brand, but the meaning is deeper. Milky Way is a galaxy. He builds his own universe. But in this picture of growing grandeur, there is one figure who does not applaud: Forrest Mars. The son whom Frank brought back from Canada looks at his father not with admiration, but with cold calculation. Forrest sees numbers. He sees how revenues from the bars, which should go toward expanding production and capturing the European market, are leaking into the Tennessee soil. Frank is a romantic, dreaming of a noble nest. Forrest is a predator, dreaming of corporate world domination. This clash of worldviews, dreamer and pragmatist, father and son, old school and new aggression, becomes a time bomb. Frank does not yet know it, but by laying the first stone in the foundation of his mansion, he effectively signs the death sentence for his relationship with his son. 1929. Stock market crash. Wall Street in panic, bankers jumping out of windows. The country plunges into the darkness of the Great Depression. And Franklin Mars does the unthinkable. He gives the order to begin the most massive construction in the history of the state of Tennessee. While America starves, he plans to build a monument to his ego. This is not just recklessness, it is a challenge. Frank Mars decides that the laws of gravity and economics no longer apply to him. He survived polio. He survived bankruptcy. He believes he is now invincible. But, as history will show, it is precisely at the moment of greatest triumph that a man is most vulnerable. The construction of Milky Way Farm will become his swan song, the culmination of his philosophy, and the beginning of his end. He will create paradise, but the price of entry into this paradise will prove higher than any check he ever signed. But in this story of chocolate and concrete, there is a second player without whom the equation does not balance. If Franklin Mars was the heart of the empire, then his son Forrest was its cold, calculating brain. And it was precisely their clash in the early 1930s that determined the fate of the Tennessee estate. Forrest Edward Mars, a man made of completely different stuff. While his father tried to compensate for childhood helplessness by buying expensive toys, the son grew up in harsh conditions with his mother in Canada. Forrest knew no luxury. He knew discipline. When he returned to his father in Chicago in the 1920s, he saw not just a successful business, he saw chaos. Frank managed the company like a family store, just a very large one. Forrest wanted to manage it like an army. Their conflict was not a soap opera scene with shouting and breaking dishes. It was a battle of two economic philosophies. Frank believed that profit was a means to pleasure. Forrest believed that profit was fuel for further expansion. Every dollar that Frank wanted to spend on buying land in Tennessee, Forrest saw as stolen from the company's future. By 1930, the tension at the Chicago headquarters had reached critical mass. Forrest watched as his father spent millions on racehorses, on Duesenberg and Cadillac cars with 16 cylinders. To the son, this was madness. America was falling into an economic abyss, and his father was behaving like a French monarch before the Revolution. It was then that the event occurred which business historians call the Great Schism, and family biographers call strategic exile. 1932. Frank Mars's office. Father and son conclude a deal that will forever change the global candy industry. Frank is tired of his son's criticism. He wants to build his paradise in Tennessee in peace, without constant oversight from the young pragmatist. He makes Forrest an offer: $50,000 in cash, and rights to produce the Milky Way bar outside the United States. In exchange, Forrest must leave. For Europe. Forever. It looks like a payoff, but in reality it was liberation for both. Forrest takes the money and leaves for England, where he will create his own, even harsher empire. It is he who later invents pedigree pet food and M&M's candies. And Frank gets what he craved most: complete, unchecked freedom to spend money. With Forrest's departure, the last brake is removed. Now nothing stands between Frank Mars and his dream. Attention shifts to Giles County, Tennessee. Here begins a process that can be called not construction, but colonization. Frank Mars does not simply build a house. He brings with him the Chicago industrial approach and overlays it on the patriarchal ways of the South. It was a fusion of two worlds: northern capital and southern labor. Local residents, accustomed to the slow rhythm of rural life, had never seen anything like it. Frank does not hire one foreman. He hires an army. At peak moments, 935 people work on the site. For a county where unemployment reached 50%, this was an economic miracle. Frank pays generously, but he demands the impossible. He does not start with the house. He starts with the land. He does not like the hills. He orders them leveled. He does not like the stream's course. He orders the water turned back. Tons of dynamite are used. Local newspapers write that the explosions on the farm are heard in neighboring towns. This is a war with the landscape. Frank Mars, the man who walked with difficulty, made mountains move at his will. Here emerges Frank's paradoxical strategy. He builds a rural idol using the most aggressive industrial methods of the time. First come the barns. These are not wooden sheds to which Tennessee farmers were accustomed. These are palaces for horses. 30 enormous structures, roofs covered with red tiles brought by special order. Inside, electric lighting, which was absent in most human dwellings of the time. Walls sheathed in hardwood. Frank loves horses more than people, and it shows in the architecture. The main horse barn is a masterpiece of engineering thought, hundreds of feet long. It is designed so that air circulates naturally, sparing the steeds from heat and odors. But the most telling moment is the fence construction. Frank wants to wall himself off from the world. He needs stone walls like those in English estates, but in Tennessee, there is not that much stone on the surface. What does he do? He buys old stone fences from bankrupt farmers throughout the county, dismantles them, transports them by trucks, and reassembles them around his property. This is a symbolic act. He literally buys up the history of the Old South, dismantles it into parts, and builds his own fortress from it. Amid this construction, a social transformation occurs. Frank Mars becomes a local deity. People who yesterday did not know how to feed their children now receive regular salaries and envelopes with the company logo. He builds them a clubhouse, a place for workers to relax that surpasses the comfort level of the workers' own homes. But this is not charity. It is the purchase of loyalty. Frank creates a feudal system. He is the lord, they are his vassals. Everyone in the county understands. Their survival depends on how well chocolate bars sell in Chicago and New York. If America stops eating Snickers, Giles County dies. By 1933, the stage is set. Hills are leveled, rivers are directed into new channels, barns shine with fresh paint. The hippodrome, an oval track a mile long, is compacted and ready to receive the country's best jockeys. Now, with the infrastructure in place, Frank is ready to proceed to the main course, to the dessert, to the construction of the mansion itself. He hires architect James Ryan, but effectively dictates every line himself. The house must stand on the highest hill. It must overlook the estate like a captain from the bridge of a ship. Frank wants to see everything. He wants to see his horses, his workers, his borders. This is a mania of control embodied in stone. The project is approved. Style, Tudor Revival. This choice is not random. Tudors are England, tradition, legitimacy. Frank tries to buy himself a history he does not have. He wants the house to look as if it has stood there for 200 years, not built on nougat money in 2 years. Construction begins, and here the scale of Frank's ambitions collides with the reality of his health. He is weakening. Kidney disease progresses. He realizes he is building against death. Work proceeds in 2, sometimes 3 shifts. Spotlights cut through the Tennessee night sky. The sound of hammers does not cease for a minute. This is no longer just a house. It is a mausoleum being built for a living man. Frank is in a hurry. He wants to live in his dream for at least one day. He spends money at such a speed that even his accountants in Chicago clutch their heads. But there is no one to stop him. Forrest is in Europe. Ethel supports her husband. Thus, on a foundation of family drama, economic contradictions, and personal tragedy, the walls of the Milky Way mansion begin to rise. Walls that were supposed to protect Frank from the world, but ultimately became the backdrop to his finale. When you drive up to the Milky Way mansion today, the first thing that catches the eye is not luxury. It is oppression. The house does not simply stand on the hill, it dominates the landscape like a medieval fortress. This was precisely the sensation that Franklin Mars wanted to buy with his millions. Architecture is always the frozen psychology of the client. If we analyze this house as a psychological portrait, we will see a man who desperately tried to compensate for physical frailty with monumental grandeur. You enter through massive oak doors. The first thing that greets the guest is not coziness, but scale. The main hall, or great room, is the heart of the house. Here the ceilings soar to a height of 40 feet, 12 meters. This is the height of a modern 4-story house, enclosed in one room. Frank Mars, the man who spent most of his life looking at the world from below upward due to illness, created a space where even giants would feel small. Look at the ceiling. It is not just wood, it is a botanical tragedy turned into decor. The beams are made of American chestnut. In the early 1930s, this species of tree was virtually wiped out by a fungal epidemic across North America. Frank Mars bought up the last stocks of this dying wood. What was a catastrophe for foresters, he turned into aesthetics. The wood has characteristic parasite marks, so-called wormy chestnut. This is a striking detail. A man with ruined health builds his palace from diseased wood, making the floors the main decoration. The fireplace in this hall is so enormous that one can stand in it full height. Servants loaded it not with logs, but with entire tree trunks. When the fire burned, it illuminated the stained glass windows, creating the atmosphere of a Gothic cathedral. There is no place for intimacy here. This is a hall for receptions, for audiences. Frank sat in a chair by this fire, leaning on his crutch, and the fire cast his shadow on the wall, a shadow that was 10 times larger than himself. We move to the dining room. Here is the strangest and most telling object in the entire estate: the table. It is not just furniture, it is an altar. The table, made of solid redwood, is 28 feet long and 12 feet wide. This is almost 9 meters in length. 30 people could dine at it simultaneously. But there is a detail that turns this table into a symbol of obsession. It was too large to fit through the door. Architects designed the room around the table. First, the craftsmen assembled this giant slab of lacquered wood, and only then did the builders erect the walls around it. This means one thing. Franklin Mars created something that cannot be removed, cannot be moved, cannot be sold. It is an anchor. For a man who, in his youth, lost all his property due to creditors, this table was a guarantee. This will stay here forever. We go further. The house has 21 bedrooms. Why does a family of 3 people, Frank, Ethel, and theoretically their daughter Patricia, need so many rooms? These are bedrooms for the entourage. Frank was building not a house, but a hotel for friends, partners, and politicians. He wanted to be the center of gravity. Each guest room has its own name, often related to the name of flowers or trees, and its own unique fireplace. But the most interesting area is the bathrooms. There are 14 of them. In 1933, in rural Tennessee, most people had an outhouse, a wooden shack with a pit latrine. In the Mars mansion, the bathrooms were Art Deco temples of hygiene. Black Carrara tile, chrome faucets, shower cabins with multiple nozzles. This was space. The contrast between the mud of the farm fields outside the window and the sterile, shining splendor of these rooms was shocking. For Frank, water and cleanliness were not just convenience. They were therapy. Hot water eased joint pain. He could spend hours in these rooms, washing away pain and fatigue. There is one more detail that is often overlooked: the stairs. The house has a magnificent spiral staircase, beautiful, curved, soaring. But for a man with a crutch, it is an obstacle. Why build something you cannot use properly? The answer is the same: image. Frank wanted his house to look like the residence of a healthy, strong aristocrat. He built scenery for a life he did not have. The house's lighting deserves separate mention. While many southern cities were still using gas lamps or kerosene lanterns, Milky Way shone with electricity. Chandeliers were custom-made, switches were silent, wiring was hidden in the walls with surgical precision. The monthly electricity bill was equal to the annual income of an average family in Giles County. When night fell, this house on the hill glowed like an ocean liner amid a black sea of fields. Local residents saw these lights from miles away. For them, it was a spectacle equal to the Northern Lights. Up there lived the Chocolate King. But who really filled this house? The staff. An army of invisible people. Cooks, maids, footmen. They had their own wing, their own stairs, their own corridors designed so that they could appear and disappear without disturbing the owners. Frank Mars demanded perfect service. Food was to be served on silver. Bed linen was changed daily. Even if there were no guests, the estate's machinery operated at full speed. However, in this architectural symphony, there was one false note: silence. The house was too large for 2 people. The echo of footsteps in the great hall was frightening. Frank built a stage for a great play, but the actors were late. His friends from Chicago came rarely. The journey was not short. Forrest was in Europe. The house was ready to receive kings, but most often only the ghosts of ambitions lived in it. The most personal place in the house is Frank's office. Small, paneled in dark walnut. There was no gigantomania here. Here was a telephone, a telegraph apparatus for communication with Chicago, and a view of the stables. It was from here that he managed his empire. And it was here, looking out the window at his beloved horses, that he began to realize time was running out. The house was completed by the end of 1933. It stood in all its Tudor splendor, Stone masonry, tiled roof, stained glass windows, furniture brought from Europe and New York. It was a triumph. Franklin Mars proved to everyone the disabled boy from Minnesota became a lord. But fate prepares a cruel twist. The house, created for eternity, will have the shortest golden age in history. The architecture, meant to affirm the owner's immortality, will become the backdrop for his rapid decline. By the beginning of 1934, the mansion was completed. Furniture arranged, paintings hung on the walls. The air smelled of fresh paint, varnish, and wax. But mixed with it was another, barely perceptible smell. The smell of medicines. The grandeur that Franklin Mars so meticulously constructed now worked against him. He built a world in which he could not fully live. Bright's disease, chronic kidney disease, had entered its final stage. His body, poisoned by its own toxins, was swelling. He moved with difficulty, even with a crutch. Most of the time he spent in a wheelchair. It is here, at the peak of his triumph, that the main human tragedy unfolds. Imagine this scene. A man possessing a fortune equivalent to hundreds of millions of modern dollars sits by a giant fireplace in a hall with 12-meter ceilings and cannot climb the stairs to his own bedroom. He looks out the window at his prize stallions, each worth tens of thousands of dollars, but cannot mount the saddle. He created paradise, but became its prisoner. External grandeur collided with internal biological catastrophe. And in this collision, the moral ambivalence of the entire story is born. Who is Franklin Mars? Hero or anti-hero? For 935 workers who received jobs and stable income in the darkest days of the Great Depression, he was a savior, a messiah, a man who literally fed their families. They looked at the lights of the mansion on the hill not with envy, but with gratitude. For them, this palace was not a symbol of excess, but a symbol of their survival. But if you look at him through the eyes of Forrest Mars in Europe, or any other company shareholder, the picture changes. This house is an act of colossal selfishness. Money earned on 5-cent bars across the country was withdrawn from circulation and poured into one man's personal fantasy. While the company needed modernization and global expansion, its founder was building stables with chandeliers and turning rivers backward. Can his methods be justified? He created jobs, but did so to build a monument to himself. He was generous, but his generosity was a tool for buying loyalty and creating a feudal court. He did not build hospitals or schools. He built a hippodrome. In these last months of his life, the key figure becomes his wife, Ethel V. Mars. She is the catalyst of transformation. Up to this moment, she was a shadow, a society lady sharing her husband's passion for horses and luxury. Now she becomes his nurse, his eyes and legs. It is Ethel who becomes the link between the dying magnate and his empire. She gives orders to the managers. She ensures that the estate's machinery continues to operate, even as its creator fades. There is no desperation in her actions. There is steely determination. She understands that now the legacy is her responsibility. Frank's love for horses in this period reaches an almost mystical level. Unable to ride horseback, he ordered the best stallions brought right to the house terrace so that he could touch them. There is one story that perfectly illustrates this fusion of business and personal attachment. One of the family's favorite horses, a mare named Snickers, dies shortly before the launch of a new chocolate bar. Frank, without hesitation, gives the new product her name. Think about it. A billion-dollar brand, known today around the world, is named after a dead horse. This is not just sentimentality. It is an attempt to grant eternity to what he loved. He could not defeat death in his own body, but he could immortalize the memory of his beloved creature in millions of chocolate bars. By March 1934, doctors in Tennessee throw up their hands. The only hope is Johns Hopkins Clinic in Baltimore, the best medical institution in the country. Frank Mars leaves his estate. He departs from the world he built from scratch, knowing that he will most likely never see it again. The house remains, perfect, shining, but empty, like an expensive shell from which the pearl has been extracted. It is at this moment that the story stops being a story of success and becomes a story about meaning. Why was all this built? To impress the Chicago elite? To prove something to his son? To escape memories of polio? Perhaps all these reasons are correct. But in the last days of his life, in a hospital room hundreds of miles from home, Franklin Mars probably faced the most important question. What will remain after him? He thought he was building an eternal monument of stone and wood, but he was wrong. His true legacy was intangible. It was in the pockets of millions of Americans unwrapping crinkling wrappers. It was in the payrolls of workers in Tennessee. And it was in the cold gaze of his son in England, who was preparing to rebuild his father's empire in his own image and likeness. Frank's death on April 8th was not the end of the story. It was merely the end of the first act. Now the stage belonged to Ethel, and the decisions she would make would determine whether Milky Way would become a legend or just a footnote in the accounting books of the Mars Corporation. The house awaited its new mistress and a new fate. The death of Franklin Mars in April 1934 created a vacuum, a huge, expensive vacuum the size of 2,800 acres. According to business logic and the laws of gravity, the Milky Way estate should have collapsed. It was a one-man project driven by his personal will and his checkbook. Without Frank, this place was a financial black hole. The company's accountants, lawyers, and, of course, Forrest Mars, watching from across the ocean, expected the inevitable. Liquidation. Sell the land, sell the horses, board up the mansion windows, and write off the losses. It would have been sensible. It would have been rational. But Ethel Mars said no. Here begins the most paradoxical phase of the estate's history, the phase that can be called the widow's renaissance. Instead of winding down operations, Ethel floors the accelerator. She does not simply preserve the farm as a memorial to her late husband. She transforms it from a personal toy into a professional victory machine. If Frank built scenery, Ethel decided to stage an opera in it that the whole world would hear. She takes control with a toughness no one expected from her. She is not a businessman. She's a player. And her bet is racehorses. Frank loved horses as pets, as aesthetic objects. Ethel saw in them a way to justify the estate's existence. She wanted to prove that the millions buried in the Tennessee hills were not madness. She wanted gold. Not metaphorical, but real. Golden trophies. The culmination of this strategy comes 6 years after Frank's death. May 4th, 1940. Louisville, Kentucky. Churchill Downs Racetrack. The 66th Kentucky Derby. America's most prestigious horse race. In the starting gates stands a stallion named Galahadion. He belongs to Milky Way Farm. No one believes in this horse. Bookmakers offer odds of 35-1. This is an astronomical coefficient. The favorite is Bimelech, the absolute star of that season. Galahadion is here just as filler. Spectators laugh at the chances of the chocolate horse. But when the gates open, the impossible happens. Over 2 minutes, as hooves pound the track's mud, the farm's history is rewritten. Galahadian does not just run, he flies. On the home stretch, he overtakes the favorite Bimelek and snatches victory. It was a shock. Newspapers the next day ran headlines about the sensation. Ethel Mars, standing in the winner's box, accepted the golden trophy. In that moment, she did what Frank could not. She made the elite, the old money, applaud the Mars name. This was a moment of absolute transcendence. Chocolate money, considered vulgar, defeated aristocratic stables with century-old histories. Galahadian's victory brought not only glory, it brought a check for $50,000, an enormous sum at the time, and, more importantly, status. Now Milky Way was no longer the whim of an eccentric millionaire. It was America's best stable. The period from 1935 to 1945 became the golden age of the estate. The house was full of life. Ethel hosted receptions that rivaled the parties of the Great Gatsby. Hollywood stars, politicians, magnates visited here. In the dining room, at that very giant table that cannot be removed, the fates of the industry were discussed. It seemed that Frank's dream had finally come true, even if posthumously. The house functioned. It breathed. It shone. But behind the facade of victories, a new, much larger crisis was brewing. A global one. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The United States enters World War II. The world changes instantly. Luxury becomes not just inappropriate, it becomes unpatriotic. Maintaining a huge estate with an army of servants, consuming thousands of kilowatts of electricity, breeding racehorses that eat grain needed at the front, all this begins to raise questions. Ethel tries to adapt, but the era of aristocratic farming is passing. Taxes rise, labor goes to the front or to war factories. The 900 workers who once built this paradise are now needed by Uncle Sam. And across the ocean, in England, Forrest Mars builds his empire. He watches. For him, Galahadian's success is a statistical anomaly. He sees numbers. Maintaining Milky Way costs the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. It is a liability. It is an anchor. In 1945, the event occurs that puts a period. Ethel Mars dies. The protector is gone. The queen has left, and the castle is left unguarded. Now power passes completely and undividedly to Forrest Mars and his sister Patricia. And Forrest is not sentimental. For him, this house is a monument to his father's extravagance, a symbol of everything he hated in company management. He sees no beauty in the stained glass. He sees inefficiency. He sees no history in the oak panels. He sees an asset that brings no profit. The decision is made quickly and ruthlessly. Sell. But selling such an estate in 1945 is no easy task. Who will buy a castle on 2,800 acres in rural Tennessee right after the war? The market for elite real estate practically does not exist. The deal that closes the Mars family's chapter in the house's history is humiliating to Frank's memory. The estate, into which millions of dollars were invested, by various estimates from $2 to $5 million in 1930s prices, is sold for a ridiculous sum. Figures vary, but it is about approximately $250,000. This is less than 10% of the construction cost. This is not a sale. This is dumping ballast. New owners have no emotional connection to the place. They do not see a temple in it. They see land. They see square meters. The period of decline begins. Furniture is sold off. Unique interior items that Frank personally selected are scattered at auctions. The land begins to be divided. From 1945, Milky Way sinks into a lethargic sleep. The house stands empty. Wind wanders through the halls where once Ethel's laughter and Frank's crutch tapping sounded. The stone fence begins to crumble. Nature, which Frank so aggressively tried to subdue with dynamite and bulldozers, begins its slow counteroffensive. Vines creep up the walls of the Tudor mansion. However, it is precisely in this desolation that the last, most important transformation occurs. The object loses its function as a residence and acquires the function of a legend. Local residents, driving past the rusting gates, tell children stories about the Chocolate King, who built a castle for his dying dream. The house turns into a ghost. It becomes a symbol of something greater than just wealth. It becomes a monument to human vulnerability. The story has come full circle. Frank Mars wanted to build a house that would stand forever, like the pyramids. Forrest Mars wanted to erase it from the face of the earth, like a mistake in an accounting report. In the end, both were right and wrong at the same time. The house survived, but it ceased to be a home. It became an artifact, an empty shell preserving the echo of the great battle between father and son, between dream and reality. And while Mars Inc. Corporation conquered the world with its bars, the old mansion in Tennessee slowly turned into a forgotten palace, awaiting the moment when its story would be rediscovered. But before we close this door, we need to understand what this house means to us today. Because the ruins of ambitions often tell us more about life than skyscrapers of success. In the final part, we will look at what remains and try to decipher Franklin Mars's last message. Today, if you turn off Highway 31 in Giles County, you will see that the gates of Milky Way Farm are open again. After decades of decline, changes of ownership, and a real threat of demolition, the estate was saved. In 2009, new investors began a large-scale restoration. Now, weddings and corporate receptions are held here. There is a cruel irony in this story. In the house built by a lonely, dying man as a refuge from the world, music now plays, and newlyweds vow eternal love. The scenery of tragedy has become the backdrop for celebration. But this house is not just an expensive banquet hall. It is the only surviving physical trace of the soul of that corporation, which today is known for its paranoid secrecy. Modern Mars Incorporated is a global fortress built to Forrest's blueprints. Absolute efficiency, anonymity, total control. Their headquarters in Virginia is known for its facelessness. No interviews, no tours. And here, in Tennessee, stands the complete opposite of this philosophy. This house screams what the company is silent about. The story of Franklin Mars is a real, tangible version of The Great Gatsby. Like Fitzgerald's hero, Mars believed he could rewrite his past with architecture. He believed that if he built a castle high enough and filled it with light, no one, and above all, he himself, would remember that lame, disabled boy from a poor family in Minnesota. What does this forgotten farm teach us today? That success has two sides. There is Forrest's success, cold, calculating, enduring, and there is Frank's success, bright, human, but fatally fragile. Forrest created a money-making machine that still works today. Frank created a dream that died with him. We eat chocolate produced by Forrest's efficient formulas, but we admire the legend created by Frank's madness. In the finale of our investigation, we must return to one specific room, to the dining room. Look there. That very giant table made of solid redwood, 28 feet long, is still there. It stands in the exact same place where craftsmen assembled it in the early 1930s. Remember the detail from the fourth part? It cannot be removed. It physically does not fit through any doors of the mansion. To remove it, the house walls must be demolished. This is a perfect, almost literary metaphor for the entire life of the Chocolate King. We spend our lives creating things that we believe define our weight in the world. We build empires, erect walls, accumulate assets that do not fit through the doors of our perception. We chain ourselves to our creations. But in the end, we are all just temporary guests in our own palaces. Franklin Mars left 80 years ago. Ethel left. Tough Forest left. And the table remained. It stands there in the silence of Tennessee as a heavy, immovable reminder. You can buy land. You can buy respect. You can even buy victory in prestigious races, but you cannot buy time. The Milky Way mansion is not a monument to wealth. It is a monument to the fact that even billions of dollars cannot fill the inner emptiness. And while the world continues every day to unwrap millions of Snickers bars, this house holds the last secret of its creator. The most expensive thing in the world is not chocolate, not gold, and not legacy. It is the life that we burn to obtain them.